My family has a tradition that sounds stupid until you're the one doing it. Every Thanksgiving, we rent a property somewhere remote, a farm, a lake house, whatever my Uncle Dale can find on short notice. And we spend 4 days doing absolutely nothing productive. No phones at dinner, no talking about work, no leaving early. It sounds peaceful. It isn't. There are 10 of us when everyone shows up, and we are not a peaceful family. This particular year, Dale found a working orchard in rural Pennsylvania. Not a farm stay, not a bed and breakfast, an actual working orchard that the owners rented out in the off-season for extra money. About 40 acres of apple trees arranged in long, perfect rows, a main farmhouse that smelled like wood polish and old rugs, and one smaller guest cottage positioned maybe 100 yards away from the property's eastern edge. The nearest town was a 20-minute drive down a road that was really just 2 tire tracks pressed into the gravel. It was the kind of place that looked beautiful in photographs and slightly wrong in person. The trees were too uniform. The rows went back further than you could see. We arrived Wednesday evening, 10 people across 3 cars, and immediately did what my family always does. Claimed sleeping spots, argued about who got which bathroom, and started drinking. My cousins Petra and Wes set up a card table in the kitchen before the luggage was even inside. My grandmother installed herself in the armchair closet to the fireplace and did not move from it for the next 12 hours. I'm 23, youngest adult in the family by 4 years, which means I spend most of these trips floating between conversations, not fully belonging in any of them. I wandered outside around 10 the first night just to get some quiet, and that's when I noticed a light. It was moving between the trees, just a soft white glow, low to the ground, moving in a direction that didn't make sense for an animal. Too steady, too deliberate. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds before it winked out, and I went inside and didn't say anything because it was probably a reflection or a neighbor with a flashlight, and I didn't want to be the person who ruined Thanksgiving by being paranoid about a light. Thursday was fine. Thursday was great, actually. We ate too much. Dale deep-fried a turkey in the driveway and nearly took his eyebrow off. My mom cried twice, once happy and once not, which is her personal record for the holiday. We went to bed late and full, and I slept without dreaming. Friday is when things started to feel off. It was small at first. My cousin Petra mentioned at breakfast that she heard footsteps on the cottage porch around 3 in the morning. She assumed it was Wes coming back from the main house, but when she asked him about it, he said he hadn't been asleep since midnight. They both laughed it off. Old buildings, probably. Pipes. We were in the country. There were animals. Then Dale found the gate to the orchard standing open. He was certain he latched it the night before because he'd specifically gone out to do it after reading something in the rental agreement about liability. He latched it again. By afternoon, it was open again. That evening, I walked to the guest cottage to return a phone charger I borrowed from my Aunt Riva and noticed something I couldn't immediately explain. The motion sensor light above the cottage door, the one triggered by steps on the porch, was on. But the porch was empty. I stood there looking at it for a moment, and then I looked out at the orchard, and the rows of trees looked back at me, perfectly still, perfectly dark. I started doing something I'm not proud of. Every time we gathered for a meal, I counted heads. 10. I kept counting to make sure we were at 10. I don't know exactly when I started doing it or why, but by Friday dinner, I was doing it compulsively, touching each chair back as people settled in like I was taking inventory. 9. I counted again. 9. I walked through the main house looking for whoever was missing and found my cousin Marcus in the bathroom and felt my shoulders drop about 4 inches. 10. I was losing it. I laughed at myself quietly and sat down and poured myself a glass of wine. After dinner, Dale brought up the gate again, and this time his voice had lost the humor it carried at breakfast. He said he found footprints on the other side of it. Boot prints, adult-sized, leading in from the road and then tracking along the outside edge of the orchard toward the house. He followed them until they disappeared into the grass near the guest parking area. Nobody said much. My grandmother said it was probably just a local cutting the property, which was a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I wanted to believe it. But I kept thinking about the motion sensor light. I kept thinking about how the boot prints had gone toward the house and not away from it. I volunteered for the pull-out sofa that night so Riva and her husband could have the bedroom. This put me in the main living room, 8 feet from the door, and I lay there for a long time listening to the house settle and the wind move through the orchard and trying very hard to sleep. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. for no reason I could identify. The fire was down to embers. The room was dark, and there was someone standing outside the front window. I could see the outline of the head and the shoulders in the glass, backlit by nothing, just slightly darker than the darkness behind it. I didn't move. I could not make myself move. I watched the shape for what felt like 3 or 4 minutes, perfectly still, and I tried to convince myself it was a tree branch or a shadow, or my own tired brain manufacturing a threat. And then the shape turned its head, very slowly, and looked directly at the window. I screamed. I'm not ashamed of it. I screamed and hit the lamp and woke up the entire house in about 6 seconds. Dale came downstairs with a flashlight and his hunting knife, and when he opened the front door, there was nobody there. But the motion sensor above the door was on, and in the flower bed beneath the front window, in the soil that had thawed slightly during the day, there were 2 boot prints facing the glass. Fresh, deep, like someone had been standing there for a long time. We spent the rest of the night in shifts. Lights on, doors locked. All 10 of us accounted for and awake and not saying much. Wes called the non-emergency police line, and an officer came out at 6 a.m. and walked the perimeter and said he'd drive through the area more often. But there's nothing he could charge anyone with. We left Sunday morning, a full day early. 10 people, 3 cars. I counted everyone into their vehicles before we pulled out, standing in the gravel driveway with the orchard at my back, not turning around. The rental company refunded us half the stay without us even asking, which I didn't find comforting. It suggested this happened before. It suggested they already had a policy for it. I've thought about those boot prints every day since. How deep they were, how still whoever made them must have been standing while we were asleep inside, while I was 8 feet away from the other side of the thin glass. I've thought about how they were facing in, not walking, not leaving, just standing there, watching in the dark between the trees. I filed it away as something I'd never fully understand and tried to move on. That lasted about 3 weeks. That's when my Aunt Reva called me, her voice doing something I never heard it do before, going very quiet and very flat at the same time. The way people talk when they're trying not to panic out loud. She said the police had contacted her, not about the orchard, about her ex-husband, a man named Gary who she left 8 years ago and never talked about, not once in all the years I'd known her. Apparently Gary had been picked up at a traffic stop about 2 counties over from that property. 2 days after we left, there was a knife in his glove box. There was also a handwritten list. She wouldn't tell me everything on it, but she told me enough. Our names were on it, all 10 of us. Hers was circled. I want to start by saying Dana and I talk about it sometimes, even now. Not often, maybe once or twice a year, usually in February when the cold gets a specific kind of gray and the trees go skeletal again. We'll be sitting somewhere ordinary, her kitchen table, my car in the parking lot, and one of us will say, that winter, and we both know exactly which one. We were 23, both of us working dead-end jobs in a town that felt like it exhaled everything interesting about itself years before we arrived. Dana was a substitute teacher. I was doing inventory at a hardware store. We'd been best friends since college and ended up in the same nowhere place people sometimes do, pulled by cheap rent and inertia. The trail was her idea. She'd read about it in some local outdoors blog. This converted railroad corridor through the woods outside of town. Old trestle bridge over a creek. Good for photos, the blog said. It was a Monday in February, and we both had the day off. And the sky was that pale, washed-out blue that makes you feel guilty for staying inside. I don't know why I remember pulling into the parking area so clearly. Dana was already out of my car before I had the key out, hiking boots crunching the frozen gravel, her breath coming out in little clouds. The trail was beautiful in a desolate way, bare hardwoods on either side, ground frozen solid, sound muffled except for our voices and the occasional bird. We talked about everything and nothing. Her students, a guy I'd been seeing who never texted back, what we were going to do with our lives. The kind of conversation that fills the lungs. The bridge appeared gradually through the trees. Old iron trestle. maybe 150 feet across, spanning the creek below. The wood planking between the rails was weathered and there were gaps, and you could see the frozen creek 30 or 40 feet down. It looked like a photograph. Dana had her phone out before we even reached it. We crossed slowly, stopping in the middle. The wind came through the valley hard and direct, and I remember zipping my jacket higher. Below us, the creek ice had that blue-green color of deep cold. I took some pictures too. I texted one to my mom. She replied with the heart emoji. I don't know exactly when I noticed them. That's the thing I've come back to so many times, in the dark, in therapy once for about 6 months. There's no clean moment. It was just suddenly there, on the near end of the bridge, the end we'd come from, standing at the point where the trestle met the trail. He hadn't been there when we crossed, or maybe he had and we didn't look back. He was an ordinary-looking man. That's what I always land on. Medium height, medium aged, wearing a dark jacket. He had his hands in his pockets. He was looking at us. People hike trails. People cross bridges. I told myself this immediately, automatically. The way your brain reaches for the explanation that lets you stay calm. But he didn't cross. He just stood there. Something about the stillness of him. The way he wasn't fidgeting. Wasn't checking his phone. Wasn't doing the things a person does when they're simply waiting. Something about that stillness pressed against inside my chest like a thumb. Dana, I said. Yeah, she said. She'd already seen him. We were in the middle of the bridge. To get back to the parking area, we had to go toward him. The other direction led deeper into the woods. No trail on the far bank that I remembered. Just tree line and frozen slope. I think about the math of the moment more than anything else. The geometry of it. How a position that feels like the middle of nowhere is really just a coordinate. And how coordinates can be reached from multiple directions. Let's keep going, Dana said. Her voice was careful, and even in a way that meant she was working to keep it in that way. She meant keep going forward, toward him, to the bank, to the trail, to the parking lot. We started walking. My footsteps on the planking sounded enormous. The gaps between the boards showed the creek below. I kept my eyes forward. He hadn't moved. We were maybe 40 feet from him when he took his hands out of his pockets. Nothing was in them. That registered some relief. Nothing in his hands. But the gesture itself was wrong. Too deliberate, like something that had been rehearsed. His eyes hadn't moved from us the entire time. Then the sound of a vehicle somewhere on the road above the near bank. An engine cutting off. A truck door slamming. That specific hollow metal bang that carries through the cold air. And then voices. 2 or 3 of them, loud and relaxed, the way people are when they just arrived somewhere and hadn't settled into quiet yet. It was nothing, just other hikers showing up, ordinary people on an ordinary afternoon. But the sound changed something in the air. The men looked up toward the road, just for a second, and then he stepped off the bridge onto the bank and turned and walked back up the trail. We walked off that bridge fast, not running. Neither of us ran. It felt important not to run, like running would confirm something we couldn't take back. We reached the bank and turned up the trail after him. He was maybe 200 feet ahead of us, walking at a normal pace. He never looked back. In the parking lot, the man crossed to a dark car on the far end of the lot, one that had been sitting in the corner away from the others the whole time, and he got in and drove away. A beat-up pickup truck was pulling in as he left. 3 people climbing out, already laughing about something. A dog jumping down from the truck bed. They had no idea. They never would. Dana and I sat in the car for a long time without speaking. I kept thinking about the timing of it. The way the truck door had slammed the exact moment it did. If they had stopped for gas on the way, or left 5 minutes later, we would still have been on that bridge. Just the 3 of us in the wind and the creek below. No witnesses. No reason for him to stop whatever he had been about to do. I don't use the word about to lightly. I've thought about it long enough to mean it. He wasn't passing through. He wasn't there to enjoy the trail. He had positioned himself at the only way off that bridge. It had taken his hands out of his pockets, and he'd been waiting for us to close the last 30 feet. The noise from the road didn't interrupt him. I think it's the only reason we're here. We should go, Dana finally said. Yeah, I said. I started the car. We never reported it. There was nothing to report. A man stood on a bridge and looked at us. That's all that happened, technically. We told ourselves this the whole drive home. We told ourselves this for months. I told myself this for years. Right up until I was scrolling the news one October evening and saw a face I've recognized above a headline, and the room went very quiet around me, and I sat there for a long time before I called Dana. The headline said he'd been arrested, that he'd lived in town for years, that he worked at a pharmacy technician. The kind of ordinary job, the kind of ordinary place that means someone probably handed him their prescriptions and made small talk and never thought twice that two women who had gone out for a walk together and never come home were connected to him, that he had been there all along, embedded in the daily life of that community the whole time. She already knew. She'd seen it an hour before. It was him, she said. I know, I said. We didn't say anything else for a while. Outside my window, the October trees were going dark and bare. I thought about the bridge, the creek below it, the blue of the ice. I thought about the van door opening and adults laughing, the sound of it traveling through the cold air at exactly the right moment. I still think about that sometimes. The accident of timing, the absolute randomness of it. That if that truck hadn't pulled in when it did, I don't think Dana and I would be here. Dana and I still talk. We still get together. But every February, without fail, we call each other. We don't always have much to say. Sometimes we just let the line stay open for a while, both of us quiet on opposite